Welcome back to Paranightmares, where the night whispers and we listen. If creepy tales and unsettling shadows are your kind of lullaby, you're in the right place. Before we descend into tonight's darkness, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time you're watching. After you finish the video, let us know which part made your skin crawl most. I'm watching, and I read everyone. The first sign that something was deeply wrong with the Burger King on Route 40 was the smell. It wasn't the familiar, comforting aroma of flame-broiled beef and fried potatoes that Liam had grown up with. It was something else, something that lurked beneath the scent of hot grease and processed cheese. It was a cloying, metallic sweetness, like old pennies and spoiled meat, a smell that seemed to cling to the back of his throat and stain the air in the dead of night. Liam had taken the midnight shift to make some extra cash for community college. It was supposed to be easy. Clean the fryers, mop the floors, restock the condiments, and handle the occasional trucker or insomniac looking for a late-night Whopper. The franchise was old, a relic from the 80s with faded orange and brown tiles and a perpetually sticky floor. It sat isolated on a long, dark stretch of highway, an island of buzzing fluorescent light in a sea of cornfields and shadows. The second sign was the king, not the creepy, plastic-faced mascot from the modern commercials, but the original, cartoonish monarch from the restaurant sign. A massive, rotating beacon of corporate cheer, the king was supposed to smile down benevolently, holding a Whopper like a scepter. But lately, his smile seemed less like an invitation and more like a threat. Sometimes, out of the corner of his eye, Liam would see the king's expression shift. The painted smile would seem to widen, to stretch into a grotesque, knowing grin. The eyes, usually wide and friendly, would appear to narrow, glinting with a strange, predatory intelligence in the flickering neon light. He'd blink, and the king would be back to normal, a harmless, two-dimensional ruler of a fast food kingdom. He blamed it on fatigue, on the hypnotic drone of the ventilation fans and the lonely hours. The incident started small, a stack of cups toppling over in the otherwise still stockroom, the soft, unmistakable sound of a child's giggle echoing from the dark, empty play place, its colorful tubes like the coiled intestines of some forgotten beast. The fry machine would bubble and hiss when no one was near it. He would turn around to find a single, perfectly cooked onion ring sitting on the prep counter, still steaming, as if left as an offering. His manager, a weary, chain-smoking woman named Brenda, would just shrug when he mentioned these things. "Old buildings make noises, kid," she'd say, her voice raspy from years of shouting orders and inhaling nicotine. "This place has been here forever. It's got character." But Brenda wasn't there on the Tuesday night when the grill turned on by itself. Liam was in the back, wrestling with a leaking mop bucket, when he heard the familiar whoosh and click of the gas igniting. He walked back into the kitchen to see the long, stainless steel grill glowing with an infernal heat, the flames beneath it licking up with an unnatural greenish tint. He quickly shut it off, his heart hammering against his ribs. As the glow subsided, he noticed something on the grill's surface. It wasn't grease or food residue. It was a dark, intricate symbol, like a cross between a corporate logo and an occult sigil, seared into the metal. It faded as the grill cooled, vanishing like a bad dream. The next night, he found the box of old VHS tapes in the manager's office while looking for cleaning supplies. They were caked in dust, labeled with faded markers. Training Module 1, Fryer Operation. Welcome to the BK family. 1987, and one that was simply titled, The King's Duties. Curiosity gnawed at him. He blew the dust off an old TV/VCR combo unit in the corner and slid the tape in. The quality was terrible, the video warped and wavy. A man with a feathered haircut and a hideous brown and orange uniform appeared on screen. "Greetings, new member of the Burger King family," he said with forced enthusiasm. "Here at Burger King, we believe that service is about more than just food. It's about maintaining a tradition, a royal tradition." The video cut to grainy footage of the restaurant's basement. Liam had only been down there once. It was a damp, spider-infested space filled with broken equipment and boxes of expired buns. In the video, the basement was clean, and in the center of the room stood a glass case. Inside the case was a mascot costume of the Burger King. It was an older version, with a more realistic, less cartoonish face. Its smile was stiff, its glass eyes wide and vacant. "The king is the heart of our home," the man on the tape continued, his voice dropping to a more serious, almost conspiratorial tone. "He watches over us. He keeps the flame burning. But the king has needs. He requires attention." The video then detailed a bizarre, unsettling ritual. It spoke of offerings to be left before the costume each night, a small portion of the day's earnings, a single, perfect onion ring, a whisper of a secret, spoken into the dark. "Have it your way," the man on the tape said. "It's not just a slogan. It is a pact. We give the king what he wants, and he provides. He keeps the customers coming. He keeps the business prosperous. He keeps the darkness at bay." The tape crackled and went to static. A cold dread washed over Liam. It was insane. A corporate ghost story. A prank played on new hires. It had to be. But the next night, driven by a morbid, inexplicable compulsion, he went down to the basement. The glass case was gone, but in the corner, slumped against the damp concrete wall, was the king costume. It was covered in cobwebs, its fabric faded and stained. The plastic head sat beside it, its painted smile looking like a rictus of agony in the dim light of Liam's phone. He remembered the onion ring he'd found, the metallic smell, the sigil on the grill. It wasn't a prank. The previous employees, Brenda, all of them, they had stopped performing the ritual. They had neglected the king. A floorboard creaked upstairs in the empty restaurant. Liam's blood ran cold. He wasn't alone. He scrambled back up the basement stairs, his breath catching in his chest. The kitchen was dark and silent. He crept towards the front, peering through the pass-through window. Something was standing in the dining area. It was the king. The costume was no longer slumped in the basement. It was standing upright, impossibly tall, its form filled out by something that was not a person. It moved with a stiff, jerky motion, like a marionette with tangled strings. It turned its head, the plastic face a blank, a motionless mask, and its glass eyes seemed to bore directly into him. Liam ducked back, his mind screaming. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers trembling too much to dial 911. He heard a heavy, dragging sound from the dining room, the sound of something heavy being pulled across the sticky tile floor. He risked another look. The king was dragging one of the heavy wooden tables towards the kitchen doors, preparing to barricade him in. It was strong, far too strong. "Have it your way," a voice whispered. It was a dry, rasping sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement, and it came from every direction at once. It was in his head, in the air, in the very walls of the building. Panic seized him. He ran for the back door, the only other way out. He slammed his hand against the push bar, but it wouldn't budge. He looked at the lock. It was chained from the outside. Brenda always did that when she left, but she wasn't due back for hours. The dragging sound stopped. A profound silence fell over the restaurant, broken only by the low hum of the drink machine. Liam held his breath, listening. He could hear a faint, rhythmic sound, a soft, wet, tearing noise. He crept back to the kitchen entrance, his morbid curiosity overriding his terror. He peered out again. The king was standing over the table it had dragged. On the table was a fresh, steaming Whopper. But the patty wasn't beef. It was a dark, pulpy red. And the smell was the sweet, metallic stench he'd been noticing for weeks, now amplified 100 times. The king's gloved hands were covered in the same substance. It was using its own essence, the very stuff of its being, to make the burger. It lifted its plastic head and looked directly at him. The empty, painted smile seemed to pulse in the gloom. It extended a hand, offering the grotesque meal. An offering, the whispering voice hissed. The pact was broken, the tradition neglected. The flame is fading. A new heart is needed to keep it burning. Liam finally understood. The restaurant wasn't just a restaurant. It was a temple, and the king was its god, a hungry god. The rituals, the offerings, they weren't just superstitions. They were what kept the entity sated. What kept it dormant inside its plastic and fabric shell? Now it was awake, and it was starving. The king took a step towards the kitchen, its movements becoming smoother, more fluid, more alive. The whispering grew louder, a chorus of voices now. The secrets and fears of all the employees who had ever worked there, all the souls that had been partially given over the years. Liam was trapped. The back door was chained, the front blocked. He was the only one there. He was the midnight shift. He was the offering. The king stood in the doorway to the kitchen, its shadow stretching long and distorted across the greasy floor. It held out the burger, a parody of hospitality. "Welcome to the Burger King family." The voices whispered in unison. "Have it your way." The first scream was one of delight. 7-year-old Leo, a whirlwind of boundless energy and ketchup-stained enthusiasm, launched himself into the mouth of the colorful tube slide. "See you at the bottom, Mom," he yelled, his voice echoing and distorting as he disappeared into the plastic labyrinth of the Burger King place. Sarah smiled, taking a sip of her lukewarm coffee. It was a rare moment of peace. The Saturday afternoon rush was in full swing. The restaurant a cacophony of crying babies, buzzing cash registers, and the sizzle of the broiler. The place was a godsend, a multi-story cage of primary-colored plastic where parents could deposit their overstimulated children for a precious 30 minutes of quiet. She watched the transparent section of the slide, waiting for the familiar shape of her son in his bright red t-shirt to rocket past. She waited and waited. A few other kids shot out of the bottom, landing in the ball pit with shrieks of laughter. But not Leo. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. He was an adventurous boy, probably exploring the highest tunnels. She gave it another 5 minutes, her eyes glued to the structure. The place seemed bigger than she remembered, a tangled, chaotic mass of tubes, nets, and observation bubbles that snaked its way towards the ceiling like a strange, synthetic vine. The cheerful colors, the bright yellows, reds, and blues, suddenly seemed garish and aggressive. 10 minutes passed. The coffee was cold. Her heart was not. "Okay, that's enough," she muttered. Standing up, she walked to the entrance of the place, a small padded archway. "Leo, time to go, sweetie." Her voice was swallowed by the din of the restaurant. No reply. She tried again, louder, her voice sharper with an edge of panic. "Leo, answer me right now." Only the muffled sounds of other children playing within the structure answered her. A young employee, teenager with tired eyes and a name tag that read Chad, was wiping down a nearby table with a greasy rag. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "I can't find my son. He's in there." She pointed at the structure. Chad gave the place a cursory glance. "Kids get lost in there all the time," he said with a bored sigh. "He'll come out when he's hungry." "He's not answering me," she insisted. "Can you please check? His name is Leo. He's wearing a red shirt." Chad let out an exasperated breath. "Ma'am, I can't go in there. Company policy. It's not insured for employees." He turned back to his table, smearing the grease into a new pattern. A cold fury mixed with her fear. She looked around the restaurant for help, for a sympathetic face, but no one seemed to notice her distress. The other parents continued their conversations, staring blankly at their trays, their children continuing to devour fries with a mechanical, joyless rhythm. It was as if she were behind a pane of glass, her panic invisible and inaudible to the world around her. She was on her own. Taking a deep breath, she ducked through the padded archway and crawled into the place. The air inside was thick and warm, smelling of stale sweat, plastic, and something else, something faintly organic, like damp soil. The sounds of the restaurant faded away, replaced by a low, humming silence. The plastic walls of the tube seemed to absorb all noise. She called Leo's name again, her voice sounding flat and dead in the enclosed space. She crawled upwards, her knees protesting against the hard plastic. The labyrinth was confusing, a series of identical tunnels branching off in every direction. She reached a junction and peered through a scratched, bubble-shaped window. The restaurant below looked distorted and far away. The people seemed like mannequins, frozen in place. Chad was still wiping the same table. His movements a perfect, unending loop. A chill snaked down her spine. This wasn't right. She pushed forward, crawling faster now, a desperate urgency propelling her. The plastic of the tubes was changing. It was no longer hard and smooth, but soft and slightly yielding, like flesh. The temperature was rising, the air growing humid and heavy. The colors seemed to be bleeding into one another, the cheerful reds and yellows swirling into sickly shades of maroon and ochre. She heard a sound then, not Leo's voice, but a soft, rhythmic pulsing. It was coming from the walls around her, a slow, steady beat like a giant heart. She pressed her hand against the plastic. It was warm and it vibrated with the rhythm. The play place was alive. Panic gave way to sheer terror. She tried to turn back, but the tunnel behind her had changed. It was narrower, tighter. It was closing in. She had no choice but to go forward, deeper into the belly of the beast. She began to see things scrawled on the inside of the tubes, crude drawings etched into the plastic with what looked like fingernails. They depicted children, their faces blank with terror, being led by a tall, thin figure. It wore a crown and a grotesque, smiling mask that was a horrifying parody of the Burger King mascot. In one drawing, the figure was feeding a child into the mouth of a tube, which was lined with teeth. A sob escaped her lips. She crawled on, the rhythmic pulsing growing louder, the air thicker. She rounded a sharp bend, and the tunnel opened into a small, dome-shaped chamber. In the center of the chamber was a pile of clothes, a small pair of blue jeans, a single white sneaker, and on top a bright red t-shirt. Leo's t-shirt. Sarah's world collapsed into a single, silent scream. She crawled towards the clothes, her hands shaking. They were empty. He was gone. Then she heard it, a small, wet, chewing sound coming from a dark opening on the other side of the chamber. It was a sound of methodical, satisfied eating. She didn't want to look. Every instinct told her to run, to crawl back the way she came, to escape this living nightmare. But she had to know. She had to see. Slowly, she forced herself to her knees and peered into the darkness. It wasn't Leo, but it was wearing his skin. The creature was small, roughly the size of her son, but its limbs were too long, bending at impossible angles. Its body was a pale, translucent white, and through its skin, she could see the faint outlines of its organs, pulsing in time with the heartbeat of the tunnels. It was hunched over, its back to her, but she could see its head, bald and veined. It turned its head slightly, and she saw its face. It had no eyes, no nose, just a wide, gaping mouth that stretched from ear to ear, filled with rows of small, needle-like teeth. A thin, black tongue darted out, licking a substance from its fingers. It was a thick, red paste. Ketchup. The creature wore Leo's skin like a loose-fitting suit. The red t-shirt was stretched tight across its unnaturally broad shoulders. It finished its meal, the last of a half-eaten hamburger, and then it began to change. With a series of wet cracks and pops, its body began to contort and reshape itself. Its limbs shortened, its torso thickened. A fine layer of blonde hair sprouted from its scalp. Its featureless face puckered and reformed, creating a crude, horrifying replica of her son's face. The mouth shrank, the lips pulled back into a familiar, cheerful smile. Two blue eyes opened, but they were cold and empty, like a doll's eyes. The thing that was once her son stood up. It looked at her, its head cocked to the side. It opened its mouth, and a voice that was a perfect imitation of Leo's came out. "Ready to go, Mom?" it asked, its smile never wavering. Sarah didn't scream. The sound was trapped in her throat, a solid ball of ice. She could only stare as the creature, this perfect, monstrous copy of her son, took a step towards her. The walls of the play place pulsed around them, a hungry, living womb that had just digested one child and birthed a new horror to take his place. Outside, beyond the plastic walls, the world of the restaurant remained oblivious, a tableau of silent diners forever eating their meal, waiting for the next child to be offered to the king's playground. The headset was a greasy, sweat-stained relic that felt like a permanent extension of Marco's skull. For 8 hours a night, it was his link to the outside world, a world of slurred words, impatient honks, and the endlessly repeating litany of the Burger King menu. "Welcome to BK. Can I take your order?" He droned, his voice as flat and lifeless as the day-old coffee he used to stay awake. It was his third week on the graveyard shift, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The manager, a gaunt, twitchy man named Al, had given him only one strange piece of advice during his training. After 2 a.m., Al had said, his eyes darting nervously towards the drive-thru window, "You might get a special order. If you do, don't ask questions. Don't try to understand it. Just say 1 moment. Take off the headset and come get me." "Got it. What kind of special order?" Marco had asked. Al had just shaken his head, his face pale in the fluorescent glare. "You'll know. Just get me." For the first few weeks, nothing happened. The hours between 2 and 5 a.m. were a dead zone, a quiet purgatory punctuated by the occasional long-haul trucker or a car full of drunk college students. Marco would pass the time reading dog-eared sci-fi paperbacks, the silence of the empty restaurant a comfortable blanket. Then, on a moonless Wednesday night, it came. The familiar ding of a car at the speaker box jolted him from a chapter about alien empires. He pressed a button on his console. "Welcome to BK, can I?" A voice cut him off. It was a whisper, a dry, sibilant hiss that seemed to scrape directly against his eardrum. It was genderless, ageless, and utterly devoid of emotion. "A Whopper," it whispered. "No pickle. Extra whisper." Marco froze. His blood felt like it had turned to ice water. Extra whisper. This was it. This was the order Al had warned him about. He could feel the fine hairs on his arms stand up. The voice on the other end of the headset felt ancient, wrong. It didn't sound like it was coming from a car speaker, but from somewhere deep inside the headset itself, from inside his own head. His hand trembled as he reached to take the headset off. But a wave of rebellious curiosity washed over him. What was Al so afraid of? It was probably just some stupid prank, a local legend the late-night crew used to scare the new guy. He wasn't going to be the scared new guy. "That'll be 509, Marco said, his voice cracking slightly. "Please pull forward." Silence. Then a single, soft click as the connection was cut. A profound sense of dread settled over him. He felt like he had just broken a sacred, unspoken rule. He quickly assembled the order, a Whopper, carefully ensuring no pickles touched the bun. But what about the other part? Extra whisper. What the hell did that even mean? He stared at the burger, wrapped in its paper. Was he supposed to whisper at it? It was absurd. Feeling like a complete idiot, he leaned close to the bag and whispered the first thing that came to his mind. A line from the book he was reading. "The Empire will fall." The sound of tires crunching on gravel announced the car's arrival at the window. Marco took a deep breath, pasted on his customer service smile, and slid the window open. There was no car. The drive-through lane was empty. The asphalt glistened under the yellow security light, but there was nothing there. Not a single vehicle. Marco stared, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. He was about to pull his head back in when the bag was suddenly plucked from his hand. It wasn't a violent pull, but a smooth, firm motion, as if an invisible hand had simply taken it. He felt a brief, bone-chilling cold brush against his fingers. He slammed the window shut, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He backed away from the window, his eyes wide with terror. He ripped the headset off his head and threw it on the counter as if it were on fire. That's when the whispers started. They weren't coming from the headset anymore. They were in the air, faint and overlapping, like a radio tuned between stations. He could hear snippets of conversation, fragments of secrets. "Never told her I lost the ring. It wasn't an accident, I pushed him. The money is buried under the old oak tree." They were voices of fear, of guilt, of regret. He stumbled back, covering his ears, but the voices weren't external. They were inside his mind, echoing in the hollow spaces of his skull. I found him like that an hour later, huddled in the corner of the stockroom, rocking back and forth. Al didn't look surprised. He just looked tired, impossibly tired. You took the order, didn't you? Al asked, his voice heavy with resignation. Marco could only nod, tears streaming down his face. Al sighed and sat down on a box of napkins. I tried to warn you. I've been taking that order for 15 years, ever since I was the new guy. What is it? Marco choked out. What wants the burger? I don't know, Al said, rubbing his temples. I call it the Collector. It's part of the franchise, I guess. Part of this specific location. It's old. It feeds on us. On our stories. Our secrets. Our regrets. He gestured to the headset on the floor. That thing is like an antenna. It listens to every order, every conversation, every thought you have when you wear it. And the Collector, it listens too. It learns you. The horrifying truth dawned on Marco. The extra whisper wasn't something you added to the burger. It was something the burger took from you. When he had leaned in and whispered that stupid line from his book, he had opened a door. He had made a trade. A piece of his mind in exchange for what? $5.09? The whispers you're hearing, Al continued, his voice barely audible. They're the leftovers. The echoes of everyone who's worked here. Everyone who's made a trade. I hear them too. All the time. You just learn to live with it. It's the price of working the night shift. Marco looked at Al, truly looked at him for the first time. The man's skin was pale and translucent. His eyes were sunken, and he had a perpetual tremor in his hands. He looked like he had been hollowed out, drained of some essential part of himself. Every time I take the order, Al whispered, his own secret now being offered up to the whispering air, I give it something. A memory of my daughter's first steps, the taste of my wife's cooking, a little piece of myself fed into the bag to keep the Collector satisfied, to keep it from getting out of the car and coming inside for the main course. The headset on the floor crackled to life, even though it wasn't plugged into anything. A new voice joined the cacophony in Marco's head. It was his own voice, speaking the line he had whispered to the bag. The Empire will fall. He repeated the phrase, over and over, a new ghost in the machine. Marco now understood the terrible bargain. The restaurant wasn't just serving burgers. It was serving souls, one whispered secret at a time. And he had just been added to the menu. The drive-thru bell dinged again, announcing a new customer, a new hunger waiting in the dark. Frank's life was a collection of bad smells. Heat-snake drains choked with 20 years of hair and soap scum, waded through flooded basements thick with raw sewage, and cleaned up after hoarders whose secrets were measured in layers of filth. He thought he was immune, that his olfactory senses had been so thoroughly abused they had simply given up. He was wrong. The call came from a Burger King on the industrial outskirts of town. The manager sounded young and panicked. Their main grease trap had backed up, flooding the kitchen with a foul gray sludge. It was an emergency job, a disgusting but lucrative emergency job. The moment Frank stepped out of his van, the smell hit him like a physical blow. It was a complex, layered stench that defied simple description. At the top was the rancid, gag-inducing odor of old, congealed cooking grease. But beneath that was something else. A heavy, coppery, almost sweet scent of decay. It was a smell Frank associated with only one thing, death. He met the manager, a kid named Kevin who looked like he was about to be sick, and followed him into the kitchen. The floor was a slick, greasy lake. The air was so thick with the stench it felt like you could chew on it. It's in the floor, Kevin said, pointing a trembling finger at a large, square metal plate in the corner. We've never had a problem with it before. It just came up. Frank got to work. He put on his heavy-duty rubber gloves that went up to his shoulders and a respirator mask that did little to fend off the smell. Using a crowbar, he pried open the metal plate. The wave of foul air that erupted from the hole was so potent it made his eyes water and his stomach heave. The grease trap was a concrete pit, about 6 feet deep and 4 feet square. It was filled almost to the brim with a solid, churning mass of gray and brown filth. It wasn't just grease. It was a semi-solid slurry of discarded food, mop water, and God knows what else. It was supposed to be a liquid that could be pumped out. This was a solid. Gonna have to shovel it out. Frank grunted, more to himself than to Kevin, who had already retreated to the far side of the restaurant. He lowered a bucket on a rope and began the grim task of scooping out the filth. The first few buckets were what he expected, a nauseating mix of grease, old fries, and bits of lettuce. But then, the objects started to get stranger. He pulled up a child's toy, a small plastic action figure. Its colors faded, but its form intact. Then came a single, rhinestone-studded high-heel shoe, looking bizarrely out of place in the muck. He found a tarnished silver locket, a cheap digital watch with the time frozen at 3:17, and a waterlogged leather wallet, empty of cash but containing a faded, laminated library card. The name on the card was Cynthia Miller. With each new object, a cold knot of dread tightened in Frank's gut. These weren't things that should be in a grease trap. These were pieces of people's lives. The work was hypnotic. Scoop, lift, dump. The pile of excavated filth grew on the kitchen floor, a grotesque monument to gluttony and decay. As he worked, the smell seemed to be getting into his head. He started to feel dizzy, disoriented. The edges of his vision began to swim. He saw faces in the swirling patterns of the grease, mouths open in silent screams. He shook his head, trying to clear it. It was the fumes, the lack of fresh air. He had to finish the job. He was nearing the bottom of the pit. The grease was thicker here, black and tar-like. His shovel hit something hard. It wasn't the concrete bottom. It was something else. He scraped away the muck, his curiosity overriding his disgust. It was a bone, long, white, and unmistakably human. A femur. Frank recoiled, dropping the shovel. It clattered against the side of the pit. He scrambled backwards, away from the hole, his heart hammering in his chest. This wasn't a clogged drain. This was a grave. He ripped off his respirator, gasping for air. But the stench was inside him now, a permanent part of him. He had to call the police. He had to get out of there. As he turned to run, his foot slipped on the greasy floor. He flailed, his arms windmilling, and then he fell, his head cracking hard against the corner of a stainless steel prep table. The world exploded in a flash of white-hot pain, and then darkness. When he came to, the kitchen was dark. The power was out. The only light was a faint, sickly green glow emanating from the open grease trap. He was lying on the floor, his head throbbing, the sticky wetness matting his hair. He tried to push himself up, but his limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. A strange lethargy had settled over him. He felt calm. The horrific smell no longer bothered him. It smelled like home. He heard a soft, lapping sound. It was coming from the pit. He dragged himself to the edge and looked down. The grease was moving. It was swirling and bubbling, rising up the sides of the pit like a slow, thick tide. The bone he had uncovered was gone, dissolved back into the churning mass. The other objects, the shoe, the wallet, the locket, were being pulled under, one by one. Frank understood then. The trap wasn't just a receptacle. It was a digestive system, a stomach for the restaurant itself. For years, it had been fed, not just with grease and food scraps, but with other things, unwanted things, people. Cynthia Miller, the girl whose library card he'd found, had been a waitress at this Burger King. She'd vanished without a trace 15 years ago. Everyone assumed she'd just run off. The green-tinged grease began to spill over the edge of the pit, flowing across the floor towards him. It moved with a slow, deliberate purpose. It wasn't just an inanimate sludge. It was a hungry, patient predator. He tried to crawl away, but his body wouldn't obey. The fall had done more than just knock him out. The grease, the very air in this place, was a part of the entity. It had been seeping into him, breaking him down, preparing him for consumption. The first tendril of warm, thick grease touched his boot. It didn't burn. It was soothing. He felt his anxiety, his fear, all of it just melting away, dissolving into a placid acceptance. He saw new faces in the swirling filth now. He saw Kevin, the young manager. He saw the girl, Cynthia. And he saw himself. The grease crept up his legs, his torso, pinning him to the floor. It was heavy, like a lead blanket. He closed his eyes, the rhythmic, digestive sounds of the pit a lullaby in the dark. The Burger King had a secret, a terrible, hungry secret. And Frank, the man who cleaned up other people's messes, was about to become a part of it forever. The marketing team at Sterling Cooper Draper Price and Associates, a name far grander than their cramped, open-plan office, had been tasked with the impossible, making the Burger King relevant again. Their big idea, born from a caffeine-fueled all-nighter, was to embrace nostalgia. They would bring back the old Burger King mascot, not the weird, silent, plastic-faced stalker from the 2000s, but the original, the wholesome, friendly, cartoon monarch from the 70s and 80s. Their research led them to a corporate warehouse in New Jersey, a dusty mausoleum of forgotten promotional materials. And there, in a corner, under a yellowed plastic sheet, they found him. It was a full-sized animatronic, a relic from a failed theme restaurant concept called King's Court from 1983. He was seated on a large, gaudy throne, one hand raised in a perpetual wave. His costume was faded, his velvet cape moth-eaten, but his face was perfectly preserved. It was a masterpiece of uncanny valley horror. The plastic skin was too smooth, the cheeks too rosy, but it was the smile that was truly unsettling. It was wide, fixed, and utterly mirthless. The painted lips were stretched thin over a set of perfectly white, unnervingly realistic teeth, and the eyes, two large glass orbs of cheerful blue, seemed to hold a vacant, yet somehow watchful intelligence. "He's perfect," exclaimed Josh, the overenthusiastic team lead. "Retro, ironic, a little bit creepy. The hipsters will love him." Against the better judgment of the team's graphic designer, Maya, they had the animatronic and his throne shipped to their office in downtown Chicago. They set him up in a corner of the main workspace, a silent, smiling monarch presiding over their cubicles. The first week, it was a novelty. People took selfies with the king, stuck post-it notes on his throne, and joked about his creepy smile. But soon, the novelty began to wear off, replaced by a subtle, creeping unease. The cleaning crew were the first to complain. They reported hearing strange noises at night, a soft, mechanical whirring coming from the king. They'd find objects on desks rearranged, papers shuffled. A janitor swore he saw the king's head turned at a different angle than when he'd started his shift. Josh dismissed it as an old building settling, an overactive imagination. Maya hated the thing. Her desk was directly in its line of sight. She felt its glass eyes on her all day, its relentless, painted smile a constant, silent judgment of her work. She started having nightmares, dreams of being trapped in a dark, empty Burger King, pursued by a silent, smiling figure that moved with a stiff, robotic gait. One evening, she was working late, trying to finish a series of mock-ups for the new ad campaign. The office was empty. The only sounds the hum of her computer and the distant city traffic. She was so focused on her work that she didn't notice the silence had changed. The low hum of the office air conditioning had stopped. A soft whir sound made her jump. It came from the corner. She looked over at the king. He was exactly as he had been all day, sitting on his throne, smiling his stupid, plastic smile. It must have been the building's heating system kicking in. She tried to focus on her screen, but her heart was pounding. She risked another glance. The king's hand, the one raised in a wave, seemed to be a fraction of an inch lower. "No," she whispered, her breath fogging the air. "You're just tired, Maya." She packed up her things, her hands shaking. As she walked toward the exit, she refused to look at the corner. She could feel its eyes on her back, a cold, plastic pressure. The next morning, she came into the office to find Josh and the rest of the team huddled around her computer. "Maya, what is this?" Josh asked, his voice a mix of confusion and anger. "Is this some kind of joke?" He turned her monitor towards her. Her mock-ups, the one she had spent all week designing, had been changed. The friendly, cartoon king had been replaced with a grotesque, distorted version. The face was gaunt and skeletal, the smile a leering, predatory slash. The slogan, "Have it your way," had been replaced with phrases like, "We smile alike." and the grin will feed. "I didn't do this," Maya said, her voice a hoarse whisper. She looked at the king in the corner. He sat on his throne, his smile unchanging, his glass eyes seeming to twinkle in the morning light. The incident fractured the team. Josh accused Maya of trying to sabotage the project. Maya, in turn, tried to convince them that the animatronic was somehow responsible, a claim that only made her sound unhinged. The office atmosphere turned toxic, thick with paranoia and suspicion. Fights broke out over trivial things. Deadlines were missed. The project, once a source of excitement, became a source of dread. And through it all, the king sat and smiled. Maya noticed that the animatronic seemed to be changing. Its colors looked brighter, the velvet of its cape richer. The plastic of its face seemed less like plastic and more like skin. It was as if it were feeding on the negative energy, the anger and fear that now saturated the office, drawing strength from their misery. The breaking point came a week later. Josh was found in the office early one morning by the cleaning crew. He was sitting on the king's throne, wearing the king's crown. He was perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees. A wide, fixed, unnatural smile was carved into his face, the corners of his lips pulled up towards his ears in a bloody, grotesque imitation of the animatronic's grin. His eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. And sitting at Josh's desk, in his ergonomic office chair, was the king. Its plastic hands were resting on the keyboard. On the monitor was a single, newly completed ad. It featured a picture of Josh, smiling his new, permanent smile. The slogan beneath it read, "Join the royal family." The animatronic's head turned with a soft, mechanical whir. Its glass eyes, no longer vacant, focused on Maya as she stood in the doorway, a silent scream frozen on her lips. Its plastic smile, for the first time, seemed genuine. It was a smile of ownership, a smile of profound, absolute satisfaction. Arthur Penhaligon's life was a fortress built of routine. Every object in his apartment had its designated place, every action a specific time. He ate the same 7 meals on a weekly rotation, wore his clothes in a predetermined order, and walked the exact same route to his job as an archivist every single day. This rigid structure was the only thing that kept the roaring chaos of his anxiety at bay. It was a fragile peace, but it was peace nonetheless. His Tuesday lunch was an immutable law of his universe, a Burger King Whopper Jr., plain, with a small fries and a water. No ice. He'd been ordering the same meal from the same Burger King every Tuesday for 11 years. The predictability was a comfort, a small, greasy anchor in the turbulent sea of his mind. One Tuesday, the anchor came loose. He sat at his usual booth, the one in the corner with the slight wobble he had learned to counteract with a folded napkin. He opened the box. Staring up at him from the center of the plain bun was a single, glistening, green pickle slice. Arthur stared at it. A pickle. It was a small thing, a trivial error. For anyone else, it would be a minor annoyance, easily rectified. For Arthur, it was a crack in the foundation of his reality. His heart began to pound. His palms grew slick with sweat. He hadn't ordered a pickle. He never ordered a pickle. His Tuesday meal was sacred, unchanging. He carefully picked the offending vegetable off the bun, his fingers trembling, and placed it on a napkin. But the damage was done. The pickle's juice had soaked into the bread, leaving a faint, circular stain. The taste would be corrupted. The routine was broken. He couldn't eat it. He wrapped it all back up and walked to the counter, his movement stiff with a rising panic. A young woman with a bored expression and a name tag that read Jess looked up from her phone. "Excuse me," Arthur said, his voice tight. "There was a mistake with my order. I ordered a plain Whopper Jr. This one has a pickle on it." Jess looked at the box, then back at him. A slow, lazy smile spread across her face. It didn't reach her eyes. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet. "Our system says you ordered it that way." "No, I didn't," Arthur stammered. "I never do. I've been coming here for 11 years. I always order the same thing." Jess's smile widened. "The customer is always right," she said, but her tone implied the opposite. "You must have wanted to change. Have it your way, right?" Her words hung in the air, mocking him. Confused and flustered, Arthur just took the bag and left, the uneaten burger feeling like a lead weight in his hand. The next day, the small cracks began to spread. The blue pen he always kept on the right side of his desk was on the left. The third volume of his encyclopedia set was switched with the fourth. These were tiny, insignificant details, but they screamed at him, violations of the natural order of his world. He felt a growing sense of vertigo, as if the very fabric of his life was beginning to unravel. He made it through the week in a state of heightened anxiety. By the following Tuesday, he was a wreck. He needed his routine. He needed his plain Whopper Jr. to set things right again. He went to the same Burger King. He stood at the counter, avoiding Jess's station. He gave his order to a different employee, enunciating every word with painful precision. A Whopper Jr. Plain. No lettuce, no tomato, no onion, no pickle, no mayonnaise, no ketchup. Just the bun and the meat. A small fries. A water. No ice. He watched them make it, his eyes tracking every movement. He saw the employee place the plain patty on the plain bun and wrap it up. Relief washed over him. He sat down at his booth. He opened the box. The burger was slathered in ketchup. A strangled gasp escaped his lips. He looked up at the counter. Jess was there, watching him. That same empty, knowing smile on her face. She gave him a little wave. Arthur's world began to spin. This wasn't a mistake. It couldn't be. It was a deliberate act. An attack. He fled the restaurant, leaving the corrupted meal on the table. But the changes in his life accelerated. His favorite gray sweater was now a pale blue. The crack in his bedroom ceiling had vanished. The quiet, reserved neighbor he'd known for years greeted him with a loud, booming laugh he'd never heard before. He was being gaslighted, not by a person, but by an institution, by the Burger King itself. He realized the terrifying truth. The restaurant wasn't just getting his order wrong, it was making it wrong. And with each deviation, it was subtly, maliciously rewriting his reality. The pickle hadn't been a mistake. It was the first edit. The ketchup was the second. Each incorrect ingredient was a small, retroactive change to his life, his personality, his world. They were forcing him to have it his way. A way he never wanted. A way that was slowly erasing the person he was. What had the pickle changed? Had he once, in this new, altered timeline like pickles? What part of him had the ketchup overridden? A memory? A preference? A belief? He became obsessed. He had to get the right order. If he could just get the one, perfect, plain Whopper Jr. as it was meant to be, he could reverse the changes. He could fix the damage and restore his world to its proper state. He went back every day. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Each day a new, unwanted addition to his burger. Onions, mayonnaise, lettuce. And with each new ingredient, his world twisted further. His reflection seemed like a stranger. His memories felt like they belonged to someone else. He was losing himself, one condiment at a time. He now stands at the counter of the Burger King, a place he once saw as a sanctuary and now recognized as his own personal hell. It's been weeks. He looks gaunt, his eyes wide with a desperate, frantic energy. Jess is at the register, her smile a permanent fixture. "Welcome back, Arthur," she says. The usual. He nods, unable to speak. He watches as she puts in the order. He prays. Maybe today will be the day. Maybe today he will get it right. She hands him the bag. He opens it. Inside is a Whopper Jr. with everything on it. Lettuce, tomato, onion, ketchup, mayo, and 2 pickles. A single tear rolls down Arthur's cheek. He doesn't recognize the man who is crying. He takes a bite. It's delicious. It was April 1st, 1998. The air was thick with the scent of spring and cheap pranks. In the booth of a dimly lit Burger King, 4 high school seniors, Kevin, Mike, Sarah, and Chloe, were laughing hysterically at a full-page ad in USA Today. A Whopper for left-handed people. Chloe giggled, pointing at the ad. All condiments are rotated 180 degrees. That is the dumbest, most brilliant thing I've ever seen, Mike said, wiping a tear from his eye. Kevin, the group's resident instigator, stood up with a mischievous grin. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna order one. They're not gonna actually make it, you idiot, Sarah said, rolling her eyes. It's an April Fool's joke. Watch me, Kevin said, swaggering up to the counter. The cashier was a tall, unnervingly gaunt man with pale skin and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb the light. His name tag was blank. He didn't look like he was in on the joke. Can I help you? The cashier asked, his voice a low, monotone rumble. Yeah, Kevin said, trying to suppress a laugh. I'd like to order one of your new left-handed Whoppers, please. The cashier didn't crack a smile. He didn't look confused. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. Of course, he said. He turned and relayed the order to the kitchen in a low, indecipherable murmur. Kevin returned to the booth, his confidence slightly shaken. Dude, that guy is creepy. I don't think he knows it's a prank. A few minutes later, cashier called Kevin's number. He placed a single, standard-looking Whopper box on the counter. Kevin picked it up. It felt normal. He opened it. The burger inside looked exactly like any other Whopper. See, Sarah said, it's just a regular burger. Kevin shrugged, a little disappointed. Well, it was worth a shot. He sat down and began to eat. The rest of the group digging into their own, presumably right-handed meals. The incident was quickly forgotten, lost in the haze of graduation plans and summer excitement. It wasn't until a week later that Chloe noticed something was off. They were in chemistry class, and Kevin, who was right-handed, was struggling to write with his right hand. His handwriting, usually neat and precise, was a clumsy, almost illegible scrawl. He kept shaking his wrist, flexing his fingers as if they were numb. Frustrated, he switched the pen to his left hand. His writing was suddenly perfect, a fluid, effortless script. Since when are you ambidextrous? Chloe asked. Kevin looked at his hand, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. I'm not, he said slowly. It just felt more natural. It was the first of many small, unsettling changes. Kevin started bumping into the right side of doorways. He complained that his watch, which he'd worn on his left wrist for years, felt strange and uncomfortable. He switched it to his right. He began to button his shirts from the top down, a mirror image of his old habit. Mike noticed it during a video game session. Dude, you're using the inverted controls, he said, watching Kevin struggle with a flight simulator. You've always used the standard layout. I know, Kevin said, his voice tight with frustration, but this way feels right now. The other way feels backward. It was Sarah who finally pieced it together, a cold dread creeping up her spine. The burger, she whispered one evening as they sat in her basement, the left-handed Whopper. Mike and Chloe stared at her. You can't be serious, Mike said. That's impossible. Is it? Sarah shot back. Everything about him is flipped. His handedness, his habits. It's like he's a mirror image of himself. They confronted Kevin, who had become withdrawn and irritable. At first, he denied it, calling them crazy. But as they listed the changes, they saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. He knew something was wrong. He felt it. The world was becoming a hostile, alien place for him. The written word, once so familiar, now looked strange. He found himself mentally flipping letters, reading words from right to left to make sense of them. The spiral on a notebook, the threads on a screw, the direction of a clock's hands. Everything felt profoundly, fundamentally wrong. He started spending more and more time looking in mirrors. It was the only place where things felt right. His reflection was the old Kevin, the right-handed Kevin. The reflection moved with a familiar grace, while he, the real Kevin, felt clumsy and out of sync with the world. He started seeing things. Fleeting shadows in the corner of his eye. Distorted faces in the reflections of windows and puddles. He claimed he could see the other side in the mirror, a world that was a dark, twisted version of their own. He said there were things moving in that other world, things made of shadow and smoke, and they were watching him. The three friends felt a growing terror. The joke, the stupid April Fool's prank, had done something horrible. That blank-eyed cashier hadn't just given Kevin a burger. He had fulfilled the order. He had taken a normal, right-handed kid and flipped him, retuning him to a different reality, a left-handed reality that was not meant for human minds. The climax came on a rainy Saturday night. Kevin called Sarah, his voice frantic. "They're coming through," he whispered. "The things in the mirror. They know I can see them. They want to trade places." Sarah, Mike, and Chloe rushed to his house. They found him in his bathroom, standing in front of the large vanity mirror. He was soaking wet, his clothes dripping onto the floor, but it wasn't raining inside. "Kevin, step away from a mirror," Sarah pleaded, her voice trembling. Kevin didn't seem to hear her. He was staring intently at his own reflection, but his reflection was smiling, a wide, predatory grin that was nothing like Kevin's terrified expression. The reflection raised its right hand, the mirror image of Kevin's left, and pressed its palm against the glass. "It's the only way to fix it," Kevin whispered, his voice sounding distant. "I have to go back. I have to unflip." He raised his left hand and pressed it against his reflection's palm on the mirror. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the surface of the mirror began to ripple, like water. The air grew cold. The smiling reflection reached through the glass, its fingers solidifying in the real world, and grabbed Kevin's shirt. With a sickening, liquid sound, it began to pull him in. His friends could only watch in horror as Kevin, their Kevin, was dragged into the mirror. His face was a mask of pure terror. For a split second, two Kevins stood in the bathroom, their friend being pulled into the glass, and the smiling doppelganger stepping out. Then, with a final, silent flash, the mirror became still again. The new Kevin, the one from the other side, stood in the bathroom. He looked at them, his smile gone, replaced with a neutral, cold expression. He flexed his right hand, then his left. He walked over to the light switch and flipped it off with his right hand, a simple, natural movement. "Much better," he said, his voice the same as Kevin's, but with a flat, empty resonance. He walked past his horrified friends and out of the bathroom, leaving them alone in the dark with the reflection of a world that had just stolen their friend and replaced him with the perfect, right-handed copy. Daniel's food blog, The Gastronomad, was his life's work and his biggest failure. After 3 years of writing passionate, overly descriptive reviews of artisanal toast and deconstructed salads, he had a readership of exactly 47 people, most of whom were his immediate family. So when the email arrived, he thought it was a prank. The subject line read, "An exclusive invitation from the King." The sender was a high-level marketing executive from Burger King Global. The email was sleek, professional, and offered Daniel a coveted spot at a private, after-hours taste test for a revolutionary new menu item, codenamed the Authentica Burger. He was skeptical but desperate. This could be his big break. The event was held at a standalone Burger King in a sterile suburban office park. The doors were locked when he arrived, and he was let in by a woman in a sharp black suit who checked his name off a list on a tablet. The inside of the restaurant was dark, except for a single pool of light in the center of the dining area, where a long table had been set up, draped in a black tablecloth and set with fine china and silverware. There were about a dozen other attendees. Daniel recognized a few of them from the local food scene: a snobby restaurant critic from the city paper, a popular Instagram influencer who specialized in extreme eats, and a few other bloggers like himself, all with the same hungry, ambitious look in their eyes. A man stepped into the light. He was handsome, charismatic, with a smile full of perfect white teeth. He introduced himself as Julian Croft, the Vice President of Culinary Innovation. "Welcome, tastemakers," Julian began, his voice smooth as silk. "Tonight, you are the first people outside our inner circle to experience the future of fast food. 4 years, we have been searching for the ultimate flavor, a taste that is not manufactured, but elemental, not artificial, but authentic, a taste of life itself." His rhetoric was intense, almost religious. The other bloggers were eating it up, scribbling furiously in their notebooks. Daniel just felt a prickle of unease. The staff, all dressed in black, emerged from the kitchen carrying silver platters. On each platter was a single, perfect-looking burger on a brioche bun. They placed them in front of the guests. The aroma was incredible, rich and savory, with a complex, gamey note that Daniel couldn't quite identify. He took a bite. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. The meat was unbelievably tender, juicy, and packed with a flavor that was both familiar and utterly alien. It was like beef, but deeper, richer, with a faint, coppery aftertaste that lingered on the palate. He devoured the entire burger in under a minute, a wave of pure, primal satisfaction washing over him. Around the table, the other guests were having similar reactions, their eyes closed in ecstasy, low moans of pleasure escaping their lips. After the meal, Julian returned, his smile wider than before. "Magnificent, isn't it?" he said. "The Authentica burger. The most authentic flavor you will ever experience." The woman in the black suit handed out sleek, black folders containing non-disclosure agreements. "Just a formality," Julian said with a wave of his hand, "to protect the secret of our ingredients until the global launch." Daniel, still basking in the afterglow of the burger, was about to sign without reading when a particular phrase caught his eye. He scanned the dense legal text. Tucked away in a subclause of a subclause was a sentence that made his blood run cold. "The undersigned hereby consents to full and willing participation in all stages of the product's life cycle, from consumer to raw material." He read it again. From consumer to raw material. It had to be a typo, a bizarre legal joke. He looked up, about to ask, but a wave of dizziness washed over him. The room began to feel hot, his stomach churning. Across the table, the Instagram influencer had gone pale, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. "I don't feel so good," he mumbled, before lurching to his feet and running for the bathroom. A moment later, another blogger groaned and clutched his stomach. One by one, the guests began to show signs of sickness. But it wasn't just nausea. It was hunger, a ferocious, gnawing hunger that the burger had not sated, but awakened. Daniel felt it too, a desperate, all-consuming craving for another bite of that specific burger. The thought of any other food was repulsive. His body, his very cells, screamed for more of that unique, coppery flavor. Julian watched them, his expression not one of concern, but of clinical observation. "A remarkable side effect, wouldn't you agree?" he said calmly. "The Authentica formula creates a brand loyalty unlike any other, a biological imperative. Once you've had it, you can't live without it." The horrifying truth crashed down on Daniel. This wasn't a taste test. It was an infection. The burger, the authentic flavor, was a parasite. A prion, maybe, or some engineered virus that rewired the brain's pleasure centers, creating an incurable, obsessive addiction. The restaurant critic, a large, portly man, was on his knees, his eyes wild with a desperate, primal hunger. "Please," he begged, crawling towards Julian. "I need more. I'll do anything." Julian smiled down at him. "Don't worry," he said. "You are now part of the Burger King family. We take care of our own. You will all be provided for." He snapped his fingers. Two large, burly men in black uniforms emerged from the kitchen. They grabbed the critic and began to drag him towards the back of the restaurant. "What are you doing?" Daniel yelled, struggling to his feet. Julian looked at him, his eyes cold and empty. "He's joining the product life cycle," he said simply. "We are a sustainable company, Daniel. We believe in recycling our assets. The next batch of Authentica burgers needs to be prepared. The next group of taste testers arrives tomorrow night." Daniel stared in abject horror, understanding the final, terrible secret of the ingredients. The authentic taste of life itself. The coppery aftertaste. They hadn't just been testing a new product. They were the new product. He made a break for the door, but the hunger was overwhelming, his legs weak and trembling. The men in black were coming for him now. His stomach roared, his mind screamed. He was trapped, a slave to a hunger that could only be satisfied by consuming his fellow man, knowing that his own fate was to eventually end up on a brioche bun, served on a silver platter, to the next unsuspecting victim in the King's endless cannibalistic taste test. The Burger King uniform was a polyester prison of brown and orange, a hideous relic of the 1980s that smelled faintly of stale grease and quiet desperation. For 17-year-old Alex, it was a means to an end. Every greasy shirt and ill-fitting pair of pants he endured was another dollar towards the beat-up 1994 Honda Civic he craved, his ticket to freedom from his dead-end town. His manager, a perpetually stressed woman named Maria, didn't have a new uniform in his size. "Just use this one for now," she'd said, pulling a folded set from a dusty box in the back office. It belonged to the last kid, the one who just left. "Washed it myself." The last kid was named Ben. According to the gossip Alex picked up from the other teenage employees, Ben had been a quiet, reliable worker who, about a year ago, had simply stopped showing up. His parents thought he'd run away. No one seemed particularly concerned. The moment Alex put the uniform on, he felt a strange sensation. It fit him perfectly, better than any of his own clothes. The polyester, which should have been scratchy and uncomfortable, felt soft, almost silky against his skin. It was strangely comforting, like a second skin. The first shift was a blur. Alex, who was usually clumsy and slow, found himself moving with an unnatural efficiency. His hands flew across the broiler, flipping patties with a speed and precision that surprised him. He assembled Whoppers with a practiced, fluid motion, his fingers instinctively knowing where each pickle and slice of onion should go. He didn't feel tired or bored. He just worked. He was a cog in a machine, and the machine ran smoothly. When the shift ended, he felt a strange reluctance to take the uniform off. He changed back into his own clothes, and the feeling of his worn-out jeans and cotton t-shirt felt alien and abrasive. The next day, when he put the uniform on, the feeling was stronger. It was like slipping into a different persona. Alex was the awkward teenager saving for a car, but the employee was something else. He was quiet, efficient, and tireless. He didn't joke around with the other workers. He just focused on his tasks: grill, fryers, assembly line. That's when the flashes started. They weren't memories, not his own anyway. They were brief, jarring sensory imprints. He'd be scraping the grill and suddenly smell the scent of cheap floral perfume. He'd be restocking the napkin dispensers and feel a phantom pain in his right knuckle, as if he'd just punched a wall. He'd hear a snippet of a song in his head, a pop song he'd never heard before, over and over again. He tried to ignore it, blaming the long hours and the monotonous work. But the flashes became more intense, more specific. He saw a glimpse of a girl with bright pink hair laughing. He felt a surge of anger and frustration, not his own, but so powerful it made him clench his jaw. He felt a deep, gnawing loneliness. He was experiencing Ben's life. The uniform wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was a vessel. It had absorbed the sweat, the emotions, the very essence of its previous owner. And now, it was imprinting it all onto Alex. He started to change. His friends said he was becoming distant, quiet. He lost interest in the things he used to love. The Honda Civic seemed less important. All that mattered was the job, the routine, the comforting anonymity of the uniform. He started picking up extra shifts, volunteering to close, spending more and more time within the greasy walls of the restaurant. One night, he was cleaning the dining room after close. He was wiping down a booth when he had the most vivid flash yet. He saw through Ben's eyes. He was sitting in this very booth, arguing with the girl with the pink hair. Her name was Jenna. He could hear her voice, sharp and angry. "It's over, Ben. I can't do this anymore. You and this stupid dead-end job." Alex felt the sting of Ben's tears, the hot shame, the crushing heartbreak. He saw Jenna stand up and walk out, the bell above the door ringing her final departure. He felt Ben's fist slam down on the table, the sharp pain in his knuckles. Alex stumbled back, gasping. The memory was so real, so visceral. He wasn't just wearing Ben's clothes. He was becoming Ben. A terrifying thought occurred to him. Ben hadn't just run away. Something had happened to him. Here, in this restaurant. And the uniform remembered. Driven by a morbid compulsion, Alex let the uniform guide him. He felt a pull, a strange magnetic attraction towards the back of the restaurant. His feet moved on their own, his body now a puppet for the ghost in the polyester. He walked past the bubbling fryers, past the prep stations, to the heavy, stainless steel door of the walk-in freezer. He felt a wave of pure, undiluted terror wash over him. Ben's terror. His hand, Ben's hand, reached out and pulled the heavy handle. The door swung open, releasing a cloud of frigid air. The uniform was pulling him inside. He tried to resist, to fight back, but his own will was a faint whisper against the roaring tide of Ben's final moments. He stepped into the freezer. The door swung shut behind him with a heavy, final thud. The automatic lock clicked into place. Darkness and cold, an unbearable, bone-deep cold. He was trapped, just as Ben had been. He saw the end of the memory now. Ben, heartbroken and distraught after the fight with Jenna, had retreated to the freezer to cool off, to be alone. The door, which had a faulty latch, had swung shut and locked him in. He had screamed. He had pounded on the door until his knuckles were raw and bloody. But no one had heard him. The restaurant was closed. The staff had gone home. Alex felt the last of Ben's hope drain away, replaced by a freezing, black despair. He was living Ben's death. He sank to the floor, the cold seeping into him. The uniform, its purpose fulfilled, finally released its grip. The memories, the emotions, they all faded away, leaving Alex alone, himself again, in the freezing dark. He was just a boy in a brown and orange uniform, locked in a freezer. He started to scream, his voice thin and weak in the insulated box. But he knew, with a chilling certainty, that no one would hear him. He was the last kid, the one who just left, and his uniform, now absorbing a new layer of fear and desperation, would hang in the back office, clean and neatly folded, waiting for the next new hire. The Burger King on Elm Street was more than just a fast food joint. It was a local legend, a place haunted by the ghost of a failed robbery. In 1978, a desperate man named Silas Black had tried to hold the place up with an antique pistol. He was cornered by the police, and the story went that he'd stashed a bag of money somewhere in the building before being shot and killed in the basement. For 40 years, his ghost was said to linger, guarding his treasure. Now, in 2018, the legend was about to be bulldozed. The restaurant was closed, slated for demolition in 2 days. Clara, the final manager, was tasked with the grim duty of clearing out 4 decades of accumulated junk. Clara was a pragmatist. She didn't believe in ghosts. The strange occurrences she'd experienced over the past week, the faint, phantom sound of an old-fashioned cash register drawer sliding open, the smell of dust and old paper money that would appear and vanish in an instant, the whispers that seemed to skitter at the edge of her hearing, were just tricks of the mind, products of an old, settling building. She was in the back office, sorting through a pile of yellowed invoices, when she heard the sound of breaking glass from the dining room. Her heart leaped into her throat. She grabbed the heaviest thing she could find, a fire extinguisher, and crept towards the sound. 3 figures were standing in the darkened dining room, their shapes illuminated by the beams of their flashlights. They were the grandsons of the 2 police officers who had been at the scene of Silas's death. The Jensen brothers, a trio of local thugs who had inherited their grandfather's obsession with the missing loot. "Evening, Clara," said the eldest, a beefy man named Dale. "Don't mind us. Just here to collect something the town owes our family." Before Clara could respond, the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang, as if kicked by a hurricane. The heavy deadbolt slid into place with a loud, metallic clank. They were locked in. A wave of unnatural cold swept through the room. The air grew thick, heavy with a palpable sense of despair. "What was that?" The youngest brother, Ricky, stammered, his flashlight beam dancing nervously around the room. A voice, thin and reedy like a warped record, echoed from the walls around them. "Get out." It was the ghost, Silas Black, and he didn't sound like he was guarding a treasure. He sounded terrified, He's trying to scare us off." Dale snarled, his greed overriding his fear. "The money has to be in the basement. Let's go." He shoved past Clara and headed for the kitchen, his brothers close behind. Clara, trapped and terrified, had no choice but to follow. The basement door was at the back, a heavy wooden thing with a rusty iron handle. As Dale reached for the handle, Ricky suddenly stopped. His head snapped to the side, his eyes wide and unfocused. "Wait," he whispered, his voice different, flatter. The deal is almost done." He turned on his brother, his movements jerky and unnatural. He grabbed a heavy frying pan from a hook and swung it with incredible force, catching the middle brother, Mark, square in the temple. Mark crumpled to the floor without a sound. "Ricky, what the hell are you doing?" Dale yelled, stumbling back. Ricky, or the thing that was controlling him, turned its head, its neck cracking at an unnatural angle. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Silas made a bargain, it said in that flat, borrowed voice. A ransom had to be paid, not for his freedom, for his protection. Clara finally understood. The stories were all wrong. Silas wasn't haunting the Burger King. He was trapped by it. The restaurant itself was the entity, an ancient, patient thing that had been there long before the first brick was laid. It fed on misery and desperation. When Silas died on its soil, filled with fear and greed, it hadn't snared his soul, but it had offered him a deal, a king's ransom. If he could provide it with 3 fresh souls, it would release his own. For 40 years, Silas had waited, his spirit too weak to do anything but create minor disturbances. But now, with the demolition imminent, the entity was getting hungry, and it was lending Silas its power to collect his payment. Dale, seeing his brother lying motionless, finally broke. He ran, not for the locked front doors, but towards the back exit. Possessed Ricky was faster. He tackled Dale, and the two of them crashed through the weak drywall into the dry storage room. A flurry of fists and guttural screams. Claire didn't wait to see the outcome. She ran for the basement. The ghost wanted souls, and the Jensen brothers were providing them. Maybe, just maybe, if the ransom was paid, the doors would open. She had to hide. She pulled open the heavy basement door and scrambled down the rickety wooden stairs, pulling the door shut behind her. The basement was damp and smelled of earth and decay. Her phone's flashlight cut a weak beam through the oppressive darkness. She could hear the sounds of the struggle upstairs, a final, wet, choking sound, and then silence. A moment later, she heard heavy, dragging footsteps, 2 bodies being pulled across the floor. 2 souls. 1 more to go. The basement door creaked open at the top of the stairs. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the dim light from the kitchen. It was Dale. His clothes were torn. His face was a mask of blood, but he was standing. "Clara," he rasped, his voice his own again, but filled with a hollow terror. "It's inside me. It's making me. It wants you." He took a stumbling step down the stairs. Clara backed away, her heart pounding. She was cornered. "I'm sorry, Silas," a voice whispered in her ear. It was the ghost's true voice, filled with 40 years of regret. The ransom must be paid. Dale lunged, his movements no longer his own. Clara screamed and threw the only thing she had, the heavy fire extinguisher. It struck him in the chest, knocking him off balance. He tumbled down the stairs, landing in a heap at the bottom, motionless. Silence. Clara held her breath, listening. Was it over? Was the ransom paid? Slowly, she crept up the stairs. The basement door was still open. She peered into the kitchen. It was empty. She walked cautiously towards the dining room. The bodies of Mark and Ricky were gone. She looked at the front door. The deadbolt was still in place. The deal wasn't done. A floorboard creaked behind her. She spun around. Standing there, where Dale's body had been, was a shimmering, translucent figure. Silas Black, just as the legends described him, but his face was a mask of agony. "It's not enough," the ghost whispered, pointing a trembling, spectral finger at her. "It wants a willing price. A trade. Your life for his." He gestured to the unconscious form of Dale in the basement. He fought back. It voids the contract. It has to be a sacrifice. The building groaned around him. The lights flickered. The entity was impatient. Clara looked from the ghost to the locked door, to the basement where Dale lay breathing shallowly. The choice was hers. Her life, or the life of a man who had broken into a restaurant to rob a ghost. "No," Clara said, her voice shaking but firm. Silas's spectral form seemed to shrink. "But I'll be trapped here forever. It will tear me apart when the building comes down." "You made your bargain," Clara said, backing away towards the office. "Not me." The building let out a furious roar. The windows shattered. The kitchen equipment began to shake violently. The entity was enraged. It couldn't take her by force, but it could tear its own house down around her. Clara ran into the office and dove under the heavy metal desk, just as the ceiling began to collapse. The last thing she saw before the world went black was the terrified, fading face of Silas Black as his ghost was finally and brutally evicted.